Okay, welcome to this eighth episode of Ace Parenting Together: Authentic, Connected, and Empathic. My name is Babak Sarajay, and I'm here with my co-host Melissa LaPlante. We bring you fresh perspectives and ideas about best parenting practices, along with time-tested communication skills to use in real-life situations to help you and your children be your authentic selves, build empathic relations, and thrive in your relationships. So today we're going to talk about discipline and consequences. So discipline, of course, is a word very much used in parenting. And I thought it would be good to bring these two things together because, the discipline and consequences both are also used as sometimes as euphemisms or stand-ins for punishment.
Yes, there's, all sorts of different words we use in the parenting world to talk about the general concept of discipline.
Discipline is usually used, and sometimes I would say misused, as a way to get people to basically comply and obey, a certain set of rules, and perhaps even against their own wishes, right? And it's really kind of the way to do that is, giving a lot of negative feedback and punishment. But it's interesting because the root of the word in Latin means knowledge. And this is also a sense in which the word is used today. We say disciplines of science, chemistry, physics, or subdisciplines, cross-disciplinary work, and so on. This is all relating to knowledge. And so the way that I would think about discipline, instead of using it as a way to punish children or anything like that, is to actually develop and foster self-discipline. So that would be a way for me, for example, individually, to acquire the knowledge and the skills that I need to do things that I like doing. Maybe I would like to know more about something and become a woodworker, for example. I want to, it might be as a hobby to pursue that. Of course, I need to develop the discipline to acquire the knowledge and the skills to do that kind of work. And so it's really, in that sense, self-discipline is a value, right? Do you agree with that, Melissa?
Yeah, I when you and I were discussing this earlier, I love when I learn new things about a concept that is a part of what I do professionally. But maybe I had learned that a while back, but knowing and having you say, that the root of the word discipline really means knowledge. And it's such a fresh perspective to look at how we parent. Because yes, when you consider the concept in as a whole, what we want is to foster a passion for learning, a
Mhm.
passion for being a sympathetic, empathetic, kind person, using their natural skills and talents to impact others, right?
That's right.
But that, like you said, is really at its basic level a value, and so is very, very challenging to parent a value. You can't really teach your kid a value, or you know power through and parent your kid to
Mhm.
do a particular activity that's valuable to you. So we have to come at it from a different approach, which is where you were heading.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, if I have a value and I would like to see that in my children or share that with my children, you can't really, I mean, we do use the word instill, but it's not really a way of like, injecting them with this value, right? That's not how it works. You cannot really approach this with external motivation and rewards and punishments and things like that, because then that is not really a value that comes from intrinsic desires and intrinsic understanding.
Right.
So instead, I mean, the best thing to do with the value is really to share that through modeling. Like you actually model the value in your own life, and show that you're committed to that value, and then children will see that that value has an impact in your life, and they can choose if they want that value or not.
Yes.
For example, I value, I mean, this is a different thing, but I value having, a clean surface to work on, right? So I don't want it to be cluttered, right? And someone else may not share that value. I mean, if I just go and try to impose this on everybody, they might comply through my use of power, but it's not a value that will just take on because I tell them to do so, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because um, really what we're trying to accomplish is, in particular for those people who are in our household, our kids, our spouse, and other family members, we want them to understand and respect what we value.
Mhm.
Um, and so to have them also engage in that value, I guess, is the best way I can say it, is that, um, like you said, intrinsically, like they're thinking, okay, this is important to my mom, or this is important to my dad or my grandfather, or whatever the
Right,
case
right.
is. So I'm going to do it for that reason. And maybe I'll like it. Maybe I will end up doing the same thing. But the key point is having it be that intrinsic um, part of the behavior, so that the child is engaging in something independently, that it's an autonomous behavior.
That's
I
right,
would.
exactly. So they can exercise their own autonomy and agency, and really do the thing that they see right for themselves. And of course, we might think that we know a lot more than the kids, and so we need to share that knowledge and so on. But it also goes through the same kind of relationship, because I might have knowledge in my mind, but in order to give it to someone else, yeah, in order to have that knowledge also grow in someone else's mind, I can't really
Right.
just inject that knowledge into their brain, right? I might try to engage them if they're interested. Then they need to recreate that knowledge in their own mind, and
Exactly.
it needs to be homegrown in a sense.
Yes.
So I was thinking, for example, I sometimes train for running races, and I have to have some plan for running a certain amount, and if I'm trying to have a certain time, then I need to do interval training or whatever. And so this is a form of self discipline, right? And if I don't do that, come race day, I show up and I'm like totally out of shape, and that has happened also, by the way. So showing up to the start line is important, but
Yes, it
um,
is.
right. But and so I talk about this with the kids, and I say, okay, so I'm doing this running, and sometimes they may be interested in joining in a run, or they have their own events or their own things that they're interested. For example, one of our children has started doing weight training, and they have weight class in school, and so they see the value in that, and they're like, okay, I want to go to the gym at certain time and certain you know. Certain way, and this is what I'm doing, and they share that with me. So this kind of give and take and sharing of experiences, that's
Right.
basically the best way I know that we can share values. And so what if, for example, something's going on at school, there's a course or there's a class where they're not doing too well, and
Hmm.
they need to do homework, so they need to have the self-discipline of doing the homework. What should we do if they're not doing that work?
And this is where it gets, tricky, because we have to constantly remind ourselves that behavior in our kids is a form of communication, right? Our kids will often behave a certain way, um, because they're trying to communicate that there's a need
Hmm.
in them that has not been met, right?
Hmm.
And so when we are dealing with, let's say, there's an assignment due, and you and your child have been working hard on finding ways for your kid to turn in their assignment on time, to not procrastinate, working together, coming up with all of those solutions, implementing, but none of that is working.
Hmm.
So what do you do in that case? How do you handle it when that Monday comes, and the assignment is due, and your kid left it at home on their
Right.
desk,
Right.
after you had
Yeah.
reminded them multiple times, and given them the strategies, helped them with the strategies to
Right.
be better organized, right? So I feel like each situation is going to be different, and depending on, like, this, I personally would handle this very differently if this was an atypical behavior in your kid.
Hmm.
And, you certainly don't want your kid to be reprimanded for something that was not a typical behavior, right? So your kid texts you, oh my goodness, when I left the keys um, in my room, I set down the folder and I forgot it. And, can you drop it off? Yes, right? Versus this being a chronic behavior in a kid, and what do you do? And then that sort of leads into the what sort of consequences
Right.
will help your child to learn not to engage in that behavior again, and sort
Hmm.
of intrinsically get that self-discipline. Well, mom's not going to save me, right? So
Right.
that's the situation where I would say, I'm really sorry that you left, your assignment at home, and I'm sorry that those strategies that you had listed didn't help. But the consequences of having points taken off, or a letter grade down, or whatever it is, um, if you want to consider that a natural consequence, it's not like you as the parent are punishing the child, right? Because that's more of the authoritarian approach. I'm going to punish you, I'm going to take away your iPad or your phone because you didn't do it. Well, that the consequences of your kid having a lower grade in that instance, or whatever natural
Hmm.
consequences happen
Right.
because the teacher instills those, can be effective.
Hmm.
um, but again, it's very situational. There's no one way to approach these situations. um,
Yeah. Yeah. So I like the way that you say that, these two concepts are actually related, discipline and consequences here.
yeah,
So there was a situation where, there was maybe lack of discipline or whatever happened. The homework is left at home, and now there are some consequences, right?
Mhm.
And I think it's great to separate natural consequence from, other forms of consequences people talk
Sure.
about, maybe logical consequences or other
Hmm.
consequences. And for me, I think, thinking about this, so for example, you mentioned that there has been some previous discussion. So there was a plan, maybe, I don't know, make sure you pack your backpack the night before, and
Right.
you have everything you need, or in the morning, do a double check, whatever that discussion was, and it
Right.
has now somehow failed. Right? So um, because of that history, it's important to have that in mind, right? So there is a
Correct.
lead up. There's nothing, no situation like this kind of just arises in a vacuum. Like you said, if this was just out of the blue, okay, well, you forgot. I forget things all the time
Sure.
myself, and so yeah, I may be very amenable to helping you with
Right.
the solution that you have.
Yeah.
Maybe bring my homework to
Hmm.
school or something. Now, if this has been happening over and over, it's a recurring problem. Um, then we had a conversation about it. We had a plan. We agreed on a solution.
Right.
Now, somehow that solution has failed. And
Mm-hmm.
somehow we didn't actually discuss what happens if the solution fails, right? So we must have maybe reconsidered it. Maybe we discussed if the solution of you packing your homework in the morning, at night, and then checking in the morning and so on, it has failed. Then what, right? So
Right.
maybe part of that discussion was, well, then if that happens, then you're going to have some natural consequences of that, and
Right.
the natural consequences are that you don't have your homework, and so something's going to be missing, and
Right.
maybe you can talk to your teacher or whatever it is. You have to address that issue, but that has been discussed. If it hasn't been discussed, right, that if the solution fails, what are we going to do? Then that means that we kind of miss that, right? Because usually you have to think about, how you're going to implement, and what happens if, this part doesn't work, and what is the fail safe or something that you have in place.
Exactly.
And so I might be saying, okay, well, I have time. I can bring your homework to school, and we're going to have to discuss this as part of, revising the plan, or and all that going forward. This is kind of like checking the results of that
Yes.
previous agreement, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it might be that I don't have time. I'm busy at my work, and I cannot really
Right.
bring that to school for you. And
Yes.
so I think it's for me, the way I look at it is that I actually would like to get away and shift the focus away from thinking about, oh, what's the consequence here?
Right.
Because I feel like it's a very slippery slope
Mm-hmm.
to, okay, I'm going to behave this way because this is going to be the consequence of your actions.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the thinking, in my mind, I am giving that consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm giving a consequence, then it's a very fine line between that and punishment. It's like almost like I'm punishing the kid.
Sure.
If I'm giving a consequence, even if I say this is a natural consequence, this is, something like that. So I would like to, instead of focusing on consequences and so on, focusing on the needs and focusing on the problem, right? So you need your homework. I need to be at work. So I'm sorry, I cannot bring your homework. And I'm happy to help you figure out what to do, right, in future.
Right.
But today,
Yes.
this is how it is.
There's a very fine line with allowing those natural consequences to happen simply because, like you said, I have an appointment. I can't bring it to the school. I'm going
Yeah.
the opposite direction, and I would love to help you, but I can't. And so I think in those situations, things had to happen the way they did because there was no immediate solution in the moment. Yes, you're going to revisit that situation and go back to the drawing board with, revising and changing, coming up with a different solution. But
Right.
to manipulate the situation so that a consequence happens to sort of teach your child a lesson, that's where it gets a bit hazy.
Yeah.
And it becomes less of a natural consequence,
Yeah.
more of a kind of a fixed consequence.
Yeah. Exactly. Something
Even though
that
you
you
did
give or you insist. That's right. Yeah,
exactly.
I agree. And because natural consequences are things that happen. Like, I don't have to think about them. They just
Yeah.
happen, right? Like
Right.
if I walk out the window, I will fall, right?
Right.
Now I don't want to do that. So with the knowledge that that is going to happen, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
Or if I, go to the store with no money, then
Yep.
I cannot purchase the thing that I want, right? So it's
Right.
not really something I need to dole out or
Right.
give. It just happens. So
Right.
yeah. So instead of thinking about that, as, oh, okay, what is the consequence here? Is it natural? Is it logical? Is it, so I can just not think about that at all and
Right.
shift my focus to what do I need? What do you need? And, what can we do about this situation?
Right. Yep.
And sometimes it's helpful to me to think, okay, what if this was not my child? What if it was my friend?
Mm-hmm.
What if it was my spouse? And they forgot something at home. And
Mm-hmm.
they would say, hey, can you bring that to me? And of course, if I can, I will, right? And
Absolutely.
if I can't, then, I will explain what the situation is,
Right. Yeah.
right? So we are much more naturally in that helping posture with our friends and with our family, sort of
Right.
adult family members. And sometimes I think because we're parents and we want children to learn, be more disciplined and so on, these
Yeah.
values that are important, we feel like we have to sort of, give them some consequence. And I think that is actually not helpful because then it creates more resentment
Sure.
than actually being helpful.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I definitely agree.
Good. Okay. So, there's other sort of situations where we have talked a little bit in the past. So, again, I'm reminded of this because I was reading it in a very, popular uh, parenting account. How, for example, the kid who leaves the lamp on, right?
Hmm.
And what's you might say a logical consequences for the kid to be grounded or whatever because you're spending additional electricity, or in this account the natural consequence was that the parent would go and turn off the like, take the bulb out,
Uh-huh.
okay, you're leaving this on all the time and I'm tired of talking about it, no bulb. And I don't know. To me, that is obviously a punishment because, okay, here's and now the kid is in the dark, right?
Right.
Uh, the and I had to go and do something like physically remove the bulb, right? And I would not call that a natural consequence because it didn't happen by itself. The natural consequence is that the electricity is being used, and so we're going to have a higher bill, perhaps, or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
And I think of the same thing, your kids slamming the door all the time,
right.
because they're upset, and so what do? You take the door off the hinges. Well, now they can't. Same concept. It's not a natural consequence unless the child literally knocked the door off. Okay, that's a natural consequence. They're going to have to figure that one
Yeah,
out.
that's
Right?
right. Exactly. It happened. You
Yes.
actually
So
slammed the door so hard it came off the hinges. Right.
right. But like you said, I think what we have to do is step back, pause, and think. I mean, it's very hard because we have human emotions. We are upset. Um,
Yes.
we have vested interest in this behavior because it's affecting us. It is unacceptable
Yes.
to us. Um, and as hard as it is, we have to pause and think, what is this behavior telling me?
Mhm.
Is there a need that's not being met?
That's right.
Is there um, something more to this? Is this out
Mhm.
of the child's control? And these are all things that we have to consider when we
Exactly.
address and confront a behavior.
That's right. Yes, exactly. And when the behavior is unacceptable to me, to the parent, if the child is slamming the door or leaving the light on or leaving the trash on or the food crumbs on or whatever it is that is unacceptable to me, then I can communicate that, right? We have talked about I messages and I
Yes.
statements to express what my problem is and what my need is. And I can go ahead and remove the door from the hinge.
Yes.
Obviously, that will solve my problem of,
Correct.
door slamming. But clearly, it will create a host of other problems, right? That some of which would affect myself. Like the
Right.
door is, there's no door to
Yes.
close, and
Right.
it would be loud,
Yes.
or other
Yeah.
things that would affect me also. So
Sure.
obviously, that is kind of a performative solution instead
Sure.
of an actual solution. But
Yeah.
if I go and express my need, hey, I'm really concerned about the door getting damaged when you slam it, and that I will have to replace it, or spend more money on it, or time on it, fixing it, or whatever. That is an expression of my problem, and then we
That's
can
right.
engage in solving that problem.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Two very different ways to approach a behavior, but ultimately, you know, using power and authority um, might work. We've said this before in previous episodes, might work in the immediate moment because it might stop the behavior, but often for the wrong reasons, and also, creating resentment and um, unhappy feelings about the relationship in your child.
Yeah.
And so then, long term, you're creating these, um, you're adding to the disconnect between you
Yes.
and your child. And
Exactly. That's right. So that's
that,
that's where the focus needs to be, on the connection of the
correct.
relationship, and instead of being these two sides of a battle, we can be on the same team, trying to meet both sides' needs.
Right. So, but
Great.
like your kid slamming the door, right? Multiple times, they have a quick temper, whatever the case may be. What what is your iMessage to them, and how do you go about changing that behavior without manipulation or
Yes.
power?
Yeah. So of course, in that moment, I might have some feelings myself, and it has happened that I've been like taken aback, like said something, but those are not iMessages. These are
Yeah,
just immediate expressions of my surprise or frustration or whatever
sure.
it is. So I would. So it really depends. Like if what is going on beforehand. Like, did I cause some distress in my child that
Mhm.
that resulted in that behavior?
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's acceptable necessarily, but there's
Correct.
some history. Um, and if so, then probably it's not the best time to go and try to press on, but I should let the child have, their time to cool off. And
Sure.
I myself maybe cool off if that was a tense
Sure.
moment. But later on, I can go and say something like, hey, bud, I know that was tense, and, I understand you got frustrated, but when you slam the door, uh, I really am concerned about the damage that it can cause.
Mm.
And then I will have to spend time and money fixing that door.
Right.
So then I need to hear what they have to say, right?
Hmm.
So that maybe they would say, yeah, no, yeah, I didn't mean to do that, I'm sorry,
Right.
and I would then say, okay, well, thanks for acknowledging that. Can we think of ways that you would do something else if you find
You need to
yourself in a tense
release.
moment again, right? And you
Sure.
need to discharge that energy. And we can think of other ways, right? So, in fact, it
Absolutely.
has happened in our household. Okay, well, here's a pillow, right? You can use the pillow, right? You can punch the pillow,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
if you really need
Yes.
to discharge that energy.
Absolutely. Sometimes walking away from the situation and doing something physical will help to release those strong emotions.
Absolutely.
That your kid can't help any differently than you can't help your immediate reaction to something. We can't, we can control how we respond, and we can always, change the path of something and go back and say, I don't like how I did that. I'd like to try that again. But, we can't tell somebody how to respond to something. If your kid is really upset by something,
Mhm.
then we need to be addressing, you know, how to express those emotions and those frustrations in an
Right.
appropriate way.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is a good place to stop for this episode.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ace Parenting Together: Authentic, Connected, and Empathic. We're working to bring you content on best parenting practices that's worth your time and adds not to the noise, but to the signal. Let us know what you want to hear on this podcast. All questions about parenting and thinking through real life situations are welcome. See you next time.